thank you all very much for coming and joining us this afternoon. My name is Ed Behrens. I'm the editor of Apollo magazine, a magazine I'm very pleased to say which is celebrating its 100th anniversary this year. So please pay attention to the copies with you and to what we're doing in the future. I'm thrilled to say that I am joined by Christina de León, who is the acting deputy director of Curatorial at the Cooper Hewitt and one of the curators for the Smithsonian Design Triennial, Making Home. And that is what we're here to discuss. But I wondered, Christina, if we could start just slightly one remove from the triennial. And I imagine that many people in the audience are very clear in their minds with what an art curator does. But a design curator is a slightly different kettle of fish. So I wondered if we could just start with you telling us a little bit about design curators' lives day by day.
Sure. Thank you so much for having me here today. I'm so pleased to share a bit about Making Home and also my day-to-day, which is not as glamorous. I think museum curators, you think about them jetting around the world and doing all of these things, leading glamorous lives with artists and designers, which that's part of it. But also so much of our day-to-day is thinking about the care of the collection, what to acquire, how to think about the growth of the collection, how to share the collection with the public in various ways, whether that be on our websites, through social media, through publications, educational programs, so on and so forth. So there's a lot that we think about when we acquire something. Obviously, exhibitions, which takes up so much of our time. Exhibitions take us, anywhere between 2 to 4 years to organize. So they're very long projects. Making Home was organized over the course of 4 years, some of which was during the pandemic. So very interesting time to organize a triennial exhibition, which is our largest exhibition series at Cooper Hewitt. It's a series that started in the year 2000. But something that's very distinct, I think, about a design curator is that obviously we're collecting designed objects that are one-of-a-kinds or part of a very limited edition serial production, but we're also collecting things that we use in everyday life.
Well, so this is one of the big differences, it seems to me, is that art curators have to go and seek out art. You do not come across art all the time in everyday life, whereas it is virtually impossible for anyone to live in an environment that isn't designed somehow. So how do you distinguish between what you want to include in the collection and what you are disregarding?
Well, these are questions that we ask ourselves all the time, right? Because we have things like potato peelers and telephones and flashlights in our collection and computers. So we do run the gamut. And we think about various things. We think about material innovation, we think about technological innovation, or how something was designed that helps solve a certain problem, whether that be the way in which this bottle is designed so that when I grip it, I hold it and it feels very secure and it's not slippery. Voss is not in our collection, but these are some of the things.
Change.
But these are some of the things that we think about. What is the innovation that's happening? What is the creativity that's being shared in this object that's designed? And obviously, how is it affecting the way that we live every day?
So that might be quite a good moment for us to segue onto the triennial. You have, the title of it is Making Home. Home is obviously the large thematic part of it. How or why did you select home as the focus of this triennial?
So triennials at Cooper Hewitt usually take on a theme for every iteration. So the past few have been things like nature, beauty, usually a very large and expansive theme that can be kind of tackled in a lot of different ways. The past few triennials have been international in scope. This triennial in particular, we decided to focus on the United States, the US territories, and tribal nations as a way to think, what does it mean to live under US sovereignty? This country, which is very expansive in its landscape, in its cultures, its languages, even, its climates. And so we thought that in thinking about home, something that I think everyone can relate to in some way and has an idea or a thought about, it was a way for us to think really expansively about design. And you'll see in the show that people tackle this idea of home in a lot of different ways that even us as curators, we weren't expecting.
Well, so home obviously, I think, means many different things to different people. And it's also quite different from housing or houses. So where did you begin? How did you begin to define what you would include in this?
So our sort of working, I don't want to call it a title, but what we used to talk about the show early on was housing, home, and habitat. And that was our way to sort of say, we want the show to tackle architecture in some way. We want the show to tackle things about our landscape. The US as home also means the land. And what does it mean to call the land your home, and how do you steward that land? And then also the emotional side, which is home, right? When you say the word home, you're thinking very much in sort of a more emotional landscape. And so that's kind of where we started. And we also drew this very long list. I'm one of 3 curators. My co-curators were Alexandra Cunningham Cameron, who's our curator of contemporary design, and Michelle Joan Wilkinson, who's the curator of architecture and design at the National Museum of African American History and Culture, which was the first time 2 Smithsonian institutions were collaborating on a triennial or really an exhibition at all. Yes. We're one of 2 Smithsonian units in New York, but the majority are in DC. We collaborate often with our fellow units, but it's very hard to collaborate on a large show, over many years. So we were grateful that Michelle and her home institution said, okay, you can work on this project. And we drew up this very long list of what could be home. And at one point, we even thought about outer space as home. What does it mean to colonize Mars, or think about the fact that we might have to live in other planets in the future? How is our body also a home? So we had this very long list, for which obviously not everything made it into the show. But we really wanted to not use the word home or habitat or housing as okay, we have to do this and we have to do that, but really use it as a kind of foundation to build on ideas of home.
Yeah. So you've referred to various things that seem quite hot topics at the moment. One of which is the use of land, and one of which is US sovereignty, coupled with this idea of the United States territories, and tribal territories. So, and you started work on this, as you mentioned earlier, some years ago, and the political landscape against which you were beginning was very different from where we are now. So how much of a factor has the shift in politics changed how you were working on this show?
Ooh, it's a spicy question.
Sorry.
When we started the show, thinking about the show, a lot of things were happening politically in this country, right? Everyone now, and all over the world, like, we pretty much began to think about this exhibition, right when we were entering into this global lockdown. The show was greenlit towards the end of 2019, early 2020. We started to think, more and beginning to organize ourselves.
So this was pre-pandemic?
This was all pre-pandemic when we thought about this topic. And now, we said to ourselves, okay, 2020, we're really going to get things going with this show. March comes along and we're working from home, we're Zooming, we're trying to figure out how to do studio visits with someone over Zoom.
And how did that?
It was weird, like, we were all kind of figuring it out at the same time. People had their families.
And when there were a lot of people carrying laptops around tiny rooms,
they would
look what I'm working on.
Walk around with their laptops and say, and this side of my studio, I'm working on this. And then over here is this, mood board that I have. And like, you can't see anything. I mean, like, sometimes we could and sometimes we couldn't, but we made it work, and people did their best to share what they were working. And little by little, we got better at it, right? And in general, people got better at sharing their practice over a screen, which is not normally how you do it. But I think also, as people were having to essentially stay in place, they were reflecting on their home, their history, where they came from, their family, obviously what's happening politically in the US. In some cases, they were going back home, and so connecting with their homelands in different ways. So it was a sentiment that I think was very palpable for everyone, and that was very, a lot of people had a lot of strong ideas around it. And in some cases, it was connected to projects that they had already been thinking about, in other cases, not so much. And the fact that everyone had to slow down and, rethink the way that they worked prompted new ideas.
So I'm going to ask a couple more general questions, then we can get into some specifics, which are as fascinating, I think, as the overview. But how did you organize this? Because obviously, the Cooper Hewitt is in one building. This is a lot of ideas about different buildings, different houses, different ways of living, different ways of looking at the problem of living. How do you fit that into one space?
So that was one of our largest challenges, because all of us on this team, we had never worked on a triennial before. And so we said, we're going to do it so different. Like, we're going to break the mold. We're going to do something that's never been done before. And the way we approached it, instead of it being more of a, object-focused or like specific project-focused exhibition where you see a lot of things in many rooms, it was a commission-based show, which means that, all of the works were made for this specific show, debuted for the first time in Triennial. It was going to be installation-based, so every participant got one entire room in a gallery for the most part. Our third floor is a bit different, so we parceled it out. It's sort of our white box. And that sort of means that we're essentially organizing 25 little shows that are not so little.
I mean, that's what it feels like. I have to say, when I arrived in the Cooper Hewitt, I was kind of shocked at how intense each room was and how much work it must have been. Like, especially that first room that you go into where there's the work of like 20 different artists all
The Black Artists and Designers Guild, the library. So a few things we thought about when organizing the show. One is that Cooper Hewitt is housed in a former home, the Andrew and Louise Carnegie Mansion, which is on Museum Mile, just, a 10-minute drive away.
They can walk from here.
They could walk from here. The mansion is organized in a sort of funny way, in which on the first floor we have the most historic architecture. It's the floor that is as close to as how the Carnegies lived in it. The second floor, a little bit less historic architecture. The third floor, almost nothing of the original architecture is left. And so in thinking about the show, we also wanted to sort of open up our home, the Carnegie Mansion, which a lot of people are interested in, right? They come in and they're like, okay, you have these shows on, but like, tell us about the Carnegie Mansion. And the Carnegie Mansion is, we do a tour, and that's also a very popular tour with the public. So we wanted to organize a show that, instead of working sort of against the historic architecture of the rooms, which, are intimate. These are not large, expansive rooms. It still has the parameters of a home, and that the work that was being created was also in some way in conversation with the surroundings. Maybe in a few cases, participants are responding to some of the history of that space.
Yes.
But in other cases, the work has no connection to what that room was originally used for. But there is a sort of dialogue that's happening, right, with the work taking up the space and having this sort of historic architecture around it. So we thought about that a lot, and once we began to think about who was going to be in the show and began to invite people, we would do walkthroughs with each participant, and sometimes we would have a room in mind for them, and we would say, what do you think about this room? And other cases, they would say, like, I've been looking, at the Carnegie Mansion layout, and like, I really like the idea of this room. And so, it was a conversation, it was a dialogue about who would go where. And we told everyone, like, if you're on the first floor, or if you're in a room with like a lot of historic architecture, we're not building walls, right? You have to work with what, similar to how we're set up right now, right? Yes. You have to work with the room. And thankfully everyone was up for it.
Yeah, well, it turned out okay. And in the course of planning this, were there any major surprises? Were there things that surprised you about the take on the theme, or results, or what?
There were so many surprises. Every day was a surprise. Every day was a surprise. I think one of the things that we were so surprised about as a curatorial team was that a lot of people wanted to reference history in some way.
Yeah.
And the way in which historic events or something that happened in the past, perhaps it might even be a family story, is very much, has very much affected life in the 21st century. Yeah. And I think we were all really surprised by how much people wanted to reflect on the past as a way of understanding the present.
Yes.
But, we're a museum, obviously, so we were like, let's do it. Let's do it, yeah.
Yes, I mean, there's a very profound sense of engagement with the past in everything, in almost every aspect of the triennial, to a degree where that almost feels like it overwhelms any pure design response to the problem of what a home is.
Sure. I mean, one of the criticisms that we've received from we do public tours. If you ever want to come on a curatorial tour, we do them twice a month. And some of the feedback that we have received is that, I've come to triennials, over the past, I don't know, maybe 5-10 years. And this is very different because I'm not seeing the chair that is made from, I don't know, mycelium.
Yeah.
And I'm not seeing, the cutlery that is
grown from squid bone.
Exactly, like that kind of stuff. And it's a very different show.
Yeah.
It's very, I would even go so far to say that it's very un-Cooper Hewitt of what we've done in the recent past. But I think that was the point. I think triennials are meant to take risks, to talk about what is happening now, to survey our current moment. It was a leap of faith, as we often like to describe it, for everyone involved, the participants as well. Many of them had never been given a full room to install. It's not like, give me this one piece. It's no, we're commissioning you to do a full room. Let's get the plans.
So on that note, I know it's very unfair to make you choose a favorite because obviously you love everything equally. But are there any that you think are particularly successful or just particularly interesting for you to have seen realized?
So one project that we have in Andrew Carnegie's private office, which is called Game Room, is an installation by the artist Tommy Mishima and the designer Liam Lee.
Which is actually usefully just on the screen.
Oh, yeah. And Tommy, who is really trained as a painter, something different about this show as well is that we have a really multidisciplinary group of participants. We have artists, we have designers, architects, we have performers.
Was that an intentional aim when you started with the was that
yes and no.
We want to talk about home. We want no one to be a designer.
Yes and no. The only thing I would say that we said very early on was no architectural models. We don't want the show to be little baby architectural models. We do have models, but they're very big and not your typical architectural model. I think when we started talking to Tommy, he had been designing for a long time these sort of insane crossword puzzles.
Yeah.
And these crossword puzzles were usually delving into a specific institution in some way and kind of just blowing it up in this very playful but also edgy way. And so we had a studio visit with him, and he's showing us his crossword puzzles and talking about game design and his interest in game design, and sort of how he sort of transitioned into that because he had become a father, and so he can no longer necessarily dedicate hours and hours on end to painting in a room by himself with his little children around. And so as we were talking about it, he said that he had also gotten very deeply into research. He had been researching Henry Clay Frick. He said, I've been doing a lot of research on Andrew Carnegie. And we knew we wanted to do something on Andrew Carnegie, but we didn't quite know what. And he was sort of really knee-deep in Andrew Carnegie and his history of philanthropy. Carnegie very famously said that he felt that wealth should not be inherited, that people who gain their wealth should give it away. He lived about the last 20, 25 years of his life in the Carnegie Mansion, which is where he made many of his philanthropic decisions. He's known as sort of the godfather of modern philanthropy. And, in giving to all of these institutions, he very famously gave to libraries. He loved giving to libraries. So there are many Carnegie libraries, but he gave to, institutions like Carnegie Mellon, and, Carnegie Hall. I mean, his name, even Carnegie Hill, which is the neighborhood in which Cooper Hewitt sits, is named after him because he purchased not just the land for his home, but the land surrounding the where he built his home, because he wanted to pick his neighbors. He wanted to know exactly who would be living around him.
Wouldn't we all?
And so, in thinking about Andrew Carnegie and his philanthropic efforts and doing this research, Tommy essentially said that he proposed following the money.
Yeah.
So Carnegie had 4 giving arms, one that focused on international peace, education, science, finance, and he created these enormous maps that essentially follows the way in which those funds trickle down into our institutions today.
Yes.
And that's through people who sat on the boards and their friends and, where they went to school and where they worked for and so on and so forth. So it's really fascinating. And then at the center, he made this board game called Philanthropy, which was modeled after Monopoly, which the theme of that, or the point of that game, is for you to become the most generous giving agent, of giving away all of your money, but also gaining access to all of these institutions. So as you're giving away your money, you're gaining more and more access to institutions. So he's sort of saying, there's 2 sides of the coin here, right? You're giving away your money, but you're also gaining a level of access and power.
Yeah, social capital for financial capital.
Exactly. And Andrew Carnegie had a lot of ideas around the way the world should work. And so that was a way of him also kind of molding society and stewarding society in a certain direction that he thought was important.
Have you played the game? Have you played a round of philanthropy?
So we had a game night at Cooper Hewitt. Tommy made a playable version. The one in the show is all hand painted and drawn, but we had 2 fabricated, and we've played. And it's super fun. It's similar to Monopoly, but you have to pay fees for research. Instead of building hotels, you're building like research centers and all sorts of buildings and things like that. So it's fun. And then in this case, we played matchmaker because Tommy, again, is a painter. And in thinking about this space, he really wanted a space that was connected to Andrew Carnegie personally. And so we teamed him up with Liam Lee, who is an amazing, very gifted furniture designer. He makes these beautiful pieces made out of needle-felted wool. And so the furniture that's in that space is loosely inspired by photographs that we shared of Carnegie's office, the way he had it kind of outfitted at the time.
It looks very authentic.
Like blasting colors,
The fluorescent pink in particular is absolutely of the
very
moment.
Andrew.
And I think when we spoke in preparation for this, there was also another piece that you were particularly, I'm going to say, interested in. Can I use that word?
Sure. So as you move through the show, the first floor is the floor that I think probably deals with the interior and aspects of the home that most of us are familiar with. The second floor is a bit more radical in its approach. It's really thinking about the idea of home in a much more expansive way. That includes our institutions, our hospitals, even,
The blood bank, can I just say that? So there is an installation in the Triennial, for those who haven't seen it, which is a blood bank. It is a collection of files of blood, and suddenly you are asked to consider blood as a place of home, and also the place that keeps blood as a different sort of home for people and genetic material.
Yes, so that installation by Heather Dewey Hagborg is called Is a Biobank a Home? Because every time we go to the hospital or go see our doctor and we have a test done, some type of bodily sample is taken, and you can give the okay for that material to be kept, which is used for research or other things, or you can ask for it to be destroyed. But most of us aren't actually conscious sometimes of the biomaterial that is being kept, and so these biobanks, which exist all over the U.S., which have a very particular type of architecture and design, was a way for us to really think about this expansive idea of home. Like, what does it mean for us to have a home for our DNA? And so that room is sort of like a blood bank. Thousands of vials,
but it is a radical version of her. Oh, is it fake? I like it much less now.
But in the back, if you saw, part of that project also was Heather. She really wanted to try to see if she could find her own blood cards. Every baby that's born, a sample of their blood is taken, usually to determine what their blood type is, and the parent can either choose to have that sample destroyed or kept. And so she went on this quest to find her own blood cards. And she did, and she found them. And then she worked with a stained glass artist, and she created this stained glass roundel using the blood cards. But the thousands of vials of it's fake blood, it's too much blood.
Well, there was a lot of blood.
And then another part of that project is that there's a loop that you hear, which are two opera singers who are singing the correspondence that she's having with these hospitals and these biobanks as she's trying to get her blood card back.
Which is strangely comic.
Yeah, so you hear "Dear Miss Dewey Hagborg," and then it goes on, and it's sort of absurd, but she does it.
But I fear I was distracting you just by picking up on that radical.
So in thinking about that, another big project, a big installation, was one that thought about Smithsonian as home for cultural heritage. And obviously we're all Smithsonian employees. And as a curator, so much of your work is about preservation. Is about stewarding, a history, a collection of objects, helping to tell a story. And so these two artists who work they're multidisciplinary, but they do a lot of work in film, had done an artist residency program at Smithsonian, which gained them access to Smithsonian archives and also Smithsonian storage facilities. And they were very taken by the way in which we talk about storage. So we often say, this object lives over here, this is their home location, this is their housing, when we talk about the materials that are used to keep the work safe. And they wanted to think about, what does it mean for Smithsonian to house objects specifically from Puerto Rico? They were two artists from Puerto Rico, and they really wanted to investigate how these objects came to Smithsonian. They looked at two specific collections. One was a collection of indigenous objects that were collected soon after 1898, when Puerto Rico became a colony of the US after the Spanish-American War, and then a much larger collection that came in the late 90s by a Puerto Rican collector named Teodoro Vidal, who had amassed a collection of like over 3,000 objects. He worked for the government. He was a government official that worked very closely with the first governor of Puerto Rico, the first democratically elected governor of Puerto Rico. And during this time, there was a lot of changes happening on the island, a lot of development of the island, a lot of modernization. And so as he's essentially taking part in helping to see that change happen on the island, he's also very distressed by the fact that, the material culture of the island is sort of like being destroyed, and people aren't doing the type of handcrafts that they used to anymore, and that there needed to be a way to preserve this history of making on the island, which could be anything from instrument to a fishing net, to needlepoint, to large carnival masks, you name it, like he collected it. And one of the first Puerto Rican curators to be hired at the Smithsonian, she essentially helped broker that collection to come to the museum, to the National Museum of American History. So it's a space that is sort of like their fantasy of a storage facility in which they have several films that are looking at storage facilities at Smithsonian, but also following the origins of these objects and where they came from in Puerto Rico. So it was a very moving project for me to work on, because my family's from I grew up in New York, my family's from Puerto Rico. I work for Smithsonian. Obviously, like there's a lot of like feelings that are going on there. And also I had to get them permission to
get them in there.
To get them in the storage facility, which, do you think Smithsonian wants anyone with a camera walking around storage facilities?
All the time. Yeah. That's their dream scenario.
They were not into it. And so but little by little, I would say like, so we're working together and we're commissioning this project and this is for a big show. And, we had to do a lot of convincing. I wrote a lot of letters. Well, luckily,
there's no bureaucracy in a museum like the Smithsonian.
Absolutely so not. Hate bureaucracy at Smithsonian. No, we love it. We live for it. But we did it. But it was one of those projects that there were some days where I was like, are we going to do it? Because there were so many moving parts and there were so many institutions and people involved. It was pretty tough.
So one sort of final question before I throw it open to the floor. In one of the rooms, which the whole installation is called The Offering, which is a sort of meditation on the Great Migration. And it's a mix of historical objects and textiles that represent journey and movement. In one of the cabinets, there is a hammered metal teapot, which I fixated on with an unusual attention. But it was particularly interesting to me in this context of installation, where you had an object within an installation that also embodied the story of that installation, that the story of the Great Migration through a hammered metal object that was passed on, may or may not have survived, this one happened to, could tell that story. And I just wondered if we could talk briefly about the role of specific objects in telling the stories that the artists are working at here? Because we've got enormous video screens doing a lot of work, we've got huge sound installations doing work, but at its heart, something this all kind of comes from are specific objects.
I love that question. I think what you see in many of the installations is an opportunity to have that moment that you just had. For instance, in the Unruly Subjects about Smithsonian as home for cultural objects, there's this one little section where there are these like little baby diamond earrings, and they're placed, in this inset next to a screen. And it's such a moment of intimacy. And if you walk too fast, you probably will miss it. And I think this is the same with the teapot, right? You could walk into that room and say, oh, look at this beautiful table, because there's a table very beautifully set in the center of the room. There's furniture. There, is this lovely sort of like glass hanging that's in the center of the room. But it's the moments in the cabinets, right? They fixated about we have to, put these types of objects in the cabinets because these are the things that make it our home, right? That make it feel more, I don't want to use the word authentic because I feel like that's maybe not the best word, but it's the one that makes it feel more real.
That makes it feel like home.
That makes it feel like home, right? If that cabinet had been empty or just a few little things that didn't feel so interesting, maybe you would be like, eh.
Well, yes. Well, there we go. Let's end on that note. Yeah, perfect. Thank you very much. I'm going to go to the floor now and see, does anybody have any questions?
The date? Oh, pardon me.
So the Triennial opened on November 2nd, and it closes August 10th.
Still on.
Still on.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
There's a microphone coming, I promise.
I wonder what role the collector played in the exhibition, if the person who donated the item or where it came from, who owned it, the importance it was to that person, how that affected its display in the gallery.
What specifically, in terms of this teapot, you mean, or just in general, the collector?
I think in general.
So I think when we talk about collector for this show in particular, we sort of have to expand our mind, right? We are not necessarily talking about the collectors that we might talk about when we discuss a fair like TEFAF, right? We're talking about your mother as a collector, your grandmother as the holder of the family heirlooms. That is what is sort of at play here. The museum as a collector for the nation. So we're thinking about collector in a much different type of way, but in another installation that we had, which is actually a film by Amy Siegel, she's looking at the use of scenic wallpapers in homes, and mostly French-produced scenic wallpapers, like Zuber, for instance, and the way in which these wallpapers live in homes throughout the US. And, it was very interesting when you sit in this room and watch this film, in some cases, that you are entering into a collector's home, right? Because you're seeing the wallpaper, but you're looking into like their home. You can see the things that they live with. And so I think the role of the collector in this show is a little bit different than it would be in some of our other exhibitions, where the collector is really crucial. You know, like I'm working on one of my next shows is of a fiber artist, and so much of my work has been really trying to find these collectors, like who held on to these, who bought this work from this artist, who kept like incredible records, and held on to it and maybe never showed it, or very rarely wanted to for it to leave their home, who like cherished this work, and how can we bring that out? But in this case, I think the collector is more, it's us, right? It's us as, you know, the things that we collect in our everyday lives that seem special, but it's just for us, you know, or for our family. And I think that's the whole point of this show, right? It's not to think about home as sort of an aspirational thing, like you want your home to look like this one day, but to say like, no, this is how we live, and it's fine, it's great.
Also, one of the things I got from going around this show, and you can correct me if I'm wrong on this, is that many of the artists are actually excavating the meaning of the object from its placement within a certain collection to predate the moment it entered a collection, as it were. It's like in the library on the second floor, where you have the cabinet of Asian jewelry with the anonymous makers, and they're trying to shift focus on the makers behind it.
Yes.
So, I mean, the idea of collecting is so complicated in all sorts of ways that you're confronted more by questions than answers, I think. Here.
Sure. And in that case, they were looking at objects from Cooper Hewitt's collection, right? So again, thinking about like Cooper Hewitt being a museum that's meant to preserve this history of design, but then we don't know who made them.
It's a necessarily partial history.
Right. And the way in which those objects came to us, some of them were collectors, some of them were, you know, came by other means, by purchases or donations, things like that.
Then we will wrap it up there. Christina, thank you so much.
Thanks, Ed.